Hey everybody, how we all doing today? This is JaySquatch Gaming and I'm Jay. Welcome to Tank Mechanic Simulator. So today we're going to be restoring the T-34 76, one of the most common and well-known tanks of World War II. Now this old girl in particular has definitely seen better days, with a little bit of love, a lot of work, and maybe a little bit of brute force. We'll have her back to her former glory in no time at all. I'll also be telling you a little bit about the tank alongside walking you through the process of its restoration. And without further ado, let's hop into the shop and get to work. To start, we've removed both the turret and engine in order to give us easier access to the assorted pieces of the tank. The first step is removing the surface rust from each part, starting with the turret, then the engine, and finally finishing up with the hull of the tank. It is worth noting that this variant of the T-34 in reality only seated 4 crew members, not 5 as the game here shows. The commander was forced to take on the role of his own loader due to space limitations in the turret. The T-34 76 tank, also known more simply as the T-34, the T-34 76 designation was actually given to it by the Germans. Started development under the Kharkiv-Morozov Machine Building Bureau, or KMDB, in 1937, and production began in 1940. From there it moved on to a long and storied history, becoming the most produced tank of World War II, and the second most produced of all time, only beaten out by its own successor, the T-54/55. Over 80,000 T-34s of all variants were produced throughout the course of the war, of which over 55,000 were fitted with the 76mm gun seen on our girl here. Weighing in at 26.5 tons at a total length of 6.68 meters, 3 meters wide and 2.45 meters tall, that's 21 feet 11 inches long, 9 feet 10 inches wide, and 8 feet tall, for our Imperial viewers. The T-34 76 housed a 4-man crew and could reach a top speed of up to 53 kilometers per hour, or 33 miles per hour. With the model V-2-34 38.8 liter V12 diesel engine, giving her a whole 500 horses, to pull that 26.5 tons around, that means an 18.9 horsepower power-to-weight ratio, all mounted on a Christie suspension, which allowed the tank to travel much faster cross-country compared to other tanks of its age. The tank, when first seen on the battlefield in 1941, was hailed as the finest tank in the world by German General Paul Ludwig Ewald von Kleist, and it was well superior to the armored vehicles the German army had access to at the time. During the T-34's debut at the beginning of Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941, the previously unknown tank design, alongside the also newly introduced KV tanks, gave the Germans quite the nasty surprise. Primarily armed with 37 and 50mm armaments, which just couldn't cut it against the T-34's armor. With 47mm of armor at the front of the hull, angled at 60 degrees, and 40mm at the sides angled at 41 degrees, the German shots were often ineffective. A German battle report states, "Half a dozen anti-tank guns fire shells at him," a T-34, which sounds like a drum roll, but he drives staunchly through our line like an impregnable prehistoric monster. It is remarkable that Lieutenant Steyp's tank made hits on a T-34, once at about 20 meters, and 4 times at 50 meters, with Panzergranat 40, which is a 5cm or 50mm shot, without any noticeable effect. The heavy sloping provided the tank with much more protection than the thickness of the plates would have you believe. Increasing the angle at which the shell is trying to penetrate causes shells to be more likely to bounce off, instead of penetrating into the cabin of the tank. This not only helped cut down the weight of the tank overall, but also the cost of production, as less steel was needed to achieve the same level of protection. Other cost-saving measures were implemented in order to allow the Soviet Union to crank out even more for the war efforts, sometimes sacrificing quality in exchange for quantity. Though, they did end up cutting the price of production down about 50% from I believe 265,000 to just over 130,000 US dollars per tank. While the T-34's armor gave it an edge during its initial debut, this spurred the German military to rank up their anti-tank capabilities in the form of fielding more of the towable 75mm PaK-40, as well as their 88mm guns rather, such as the ones mounted on the Tiger, typically proving quite lethal. With the initial rust removal complete, we now move on to the fine sanding with the sandblaster, working in much the same order as with the first step, the rust removal, going through the turret, engine, and hull. So one story about the T-34 tickled me particularly, and I'd like to share it with you. So in October of 1941, the Soviet 21st Tank Brigade ended up on the outskirts of Kalinin, occupied by the German Wehrmacht at the time, and they were told to make a raid in the enemy rear and go around the city to reach their own troops. So, in the meantime, one T-34, under the command of Stefan Gorbets, ended up separated from the main group, and due to a radio failure had no way to contact anybody else around them. They didn't know that the rest of their raid had actually been halted by an air attack, and they were entirely on their own at that point. So after destroying an entire German motorcycle column, Gorbets appeared on the German airfield. And the German soldiers, kind of surprised by the balls on this dude for showing up alone, just watched as he destroyed 2 Junkers 87 planes and some fuel supplies, and then moved on. It was at that point that Gorbets actually realized he was alone, and with no support from other tanks. So at that point, there's really no going back. He just drives his tank straight through heavy enemy fire, right across the city center, full of Germans, ramming another artillery gun and another tank. And after all that, literally on fire, full of holes, and with a no longer functioning gun, showed up at the positions of the Soviet soldiers and were greeted as heroes. And that just kills me because I love that shit. He had no idea what was going on, but just shit hit the fan and he went balls to the wall and he took care of business. Well, him and his men, of course. Everybody was involved in the operation of the tank, but... oh... that tickles me pink. And we seem to have fallen through the floor of the tank. Not only are we a rather talented tank mechanic, but we also appear to be a magician to boot. This may explain our ability to restore a derelict tank to working order in under an hour. Poor armor quality plagued the tank during its introductory years, with overall build quality being subpar, and the first tanks produced up until the model 1942, featuring a cast turret, which was much softer than the rest of the tank's armor at the time. These cast turrets sometimes struggled to even hold up against the 37mm anti-aircraft shells. The model 1942 featured an improvement on this flaw, now sporting a hexagonal turret that not only featured stronger armor, but again, helped cut down on the overall price and time investment of building the tank. The hull armor also suffered initially as well. In 1942, the USSR donated two 1941 model T-34s to the United States for testing. These tests performed at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds showed soft, poorly tempered steel weakened the integrity of the armor, and there were often found gaps in the welds, and it was noted that in a heavy rain, lots of water flows through the chinks and cracks, which leads to the disabling of the electrical equipment and even the ammunition. Despite the weaknesses in the armor, it was enough to cause problems with the Germans in its early years, and the T-34 continued to undergo changes and improvements throughout the war and enjoyed production for years after. The gun mounted on this Russian workhorse is nothing to scoff at either. A majority of them received the F-34 76.2mm gun, throwing 6.5 kilogram rounds downrange at an initial muzzle velocity of 680 meters per second, or 14 pounds, at 2,200 feet per second. That's a 3-inch projectile that weighs as much as a bowling ball, moving at the speed of an F-16 fighter jet, or 2 bricks, moving about 53 times as fast as Usain Bolt, if you prefer. In other words, a very, very bad time for anything in front of it. With a possible penetration of 92 millimeters at 500 meters distance, it could easily defeat most of the early German armor. We've nearly finished with the sanding, but the last control panel there was giving me difficulties, so I decided to move on to replacing the missing parts and deal with it later, when the tank is primed and the spots I missed are easier to pick out. There were also some parts that we needed to remove in order to reach ones behind them. They may need rust removal or sanding, but we'll do that as we go along the line. The best German tanks that it would go up against in 1941 were the Panzer III and IV, with no more than 60 millimeters of flat armor at their thickest points, easily within the limits of our gun here. Now, this would be the gun dominantly used in production of the T-34 tank until early in 1944. At that point, advances in German armor had rendered the gun nearly obsolete, and a replacement was implemented. The search for the replacement started in 1943, and the 57mm ZIS-2 anti-tank gun was mounted on a few T-34 chassis, but the high explosive rounds just didn't cut the mustard for general use, and they eventually settled on the D-5T and ZIS-S 53 85mm guns. Thus, the new T-34-85 was born, and became the new standard for the T-34 tank at that point. However, the focus is on our 76mm variant today. The T-34 also sported some advantages, mobility-wise, over the German tanks it was up against on the Eastern Front. It sported wider tracks, allowing it to move more effectively over mud and heavy snow, while the Panzer IVs it faced were more likely to sink and bog down due to using narrower tracks. Though the quality issues came back to haunt the T-34 here as well. In fact, despite its reputation of heavy use, it wasn't always sunshine and daisies for this tank, or its crew for that matter. Due to cost cutting and the speed at which the USSR was slamming these babies out, the reliability of the T-34 suffered. Another note from the test performed at the Aberdeen Proving Ground stated, "The pins are extremely poorly tempered and made of poor steel. As a result, they quickly wear and the tracks often break," as well as transmission issues in the earlier models of the tank, which were so prone to wear and breakage that some T-34s actually went into battle with a spare strapped into the engine compartment. And that rat bastard control panel has finally decided to show its face, so we're gonna go grab that sandblaster and finish it off real quick. There, I feel much better now. The sandblasting is finally complete, and our girl here's got all her parts back in order. We're ready to reseat the turret and drop the engine back in. Now that our eggs are all in one basket, we're ready to get to painting her, starting with our primer coat. The gearbox was eventually replaced in the model 1943, though the official Soviet designation was still the model 1942, the very same model that introduced the improved hexagonal turret. That model also introduced the addition of new cyclone filters, replacing the nearly ineffective ones used in previous models. The older Pullman air filter was essentially a hindrance to the vehicle overall. Not only did it not provide any effective filtration, causing the engines to break down in dusty or sandy conditions, it also had insufficient air intake, starving the engine of oxygen and reducing its output. In addition to its technical flaws, the T-34-76 crew suffered its poorly designed compartment layout as well. The turret in particular was cramped, and housed two of the crew. This required the commander to both aim and fire the gun, which compared to the three-man crews of the Germans, consisting of a commander, gunner, and loader, was far inferior and much less efficient. It was noted that German tank crews could often get up to 3 rounds fired to a T-34's 1, which could in part be attributed to the poor vision that the T-34 offered to its commander. With a single massive hatch for the turret, the commander was limited to a single vision slit and the traversable periscope mounted in the tank. The single large hatch, nicknamed the Perazok, or stuffed bun, was replaced in 1942 with 2 separate hatches, which helped with the visibility issue a bit, but earned it a new nickname with the Germans, Mickey Mouse, due to the way the new hatches looked like round ears on the tank when opened. To add insult to injury, the loader gets a raw deal as well. The T-34 lacked a turret basket, a rotating floor, which turns with the turret, forcing him to maneuver in the already cramped turret compartment. There is room for 9 rounds mounted on racks inside the turret compartment, but the rest of the ammunition was housed in boxes that made up the floor of the vehicle, covered up with rubber mats. Once the initial 9 rounds were expended, the floor quickly became a mess of open bins and rubber mats, further decreasing efficiency. In short order, she's primed and ready for the top coat. First though, let's have a quick walk around to admire our work. Even only partially restored to her former glory, she is quite the sight to behold. We're finally ready to throw down our top coat of paint, so let's get back to work. Now, I'd like to share with you one of my absolute favorite stories about the T-34 tank. During the winter of 1942, one of them, led by Captain Gavril Polovchenya, ended up being stuck in a river near the town of Andriopol. While they were waiting, they ended up being surrounded by German soldiers, and the captain, or commander rather, ordered his crew to stay absolutely silent. So they did, and the Germans ended up taking them back. They dragged it out of the water, and they sent it back to town, with the crew still inside, of course. So in the morning, you know, they're still there, they're awake and everything. They stage breakthrough, fighting their way out into the streets of the town, and causing over 60 casualties, 20 soldiers, 30 military cars, and 10 artillery guns in total. And really, the Germans, they didn't expect that. They didn't really know what to do about it, so they just kind of let it happen. The later T-34-85 variant offered an expanded, much more ergonomic turret. However, when the tank came up short in reliability and quality, it more than made up for it in pure quantity. The staggering numbers of T-34s built throughout their production, 57,000 in the T-34-76 variant, and nearly 23,000 T-34-85s. Production of the T-34 ran all the way up to 1958, and models have been seen in use for light frontline activity as recently as 2010. For years, it formed the backbone of the Soviet armored divisions, and a myriad of other countries after the fact, earning the respect and renown that it knows today. The T-34, good enough to get the job done. With one last touch, our project is technically complete, but I can't help but feel like something's missing. That's it. Absolutely perfect. In my shop, you can get your tank any color you want, as long as it's black. She is a real beauty, though. Just remember how she looked before. And she's fueled up and ready to go, so let's take her out for a spin. Oh boy. This old girl's got some life in her yet. Well, that's about all I've got for you today, folks. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. Like, comment, and subscribe if you did. If you know any cool facts about the tank featured today, or if I have some incorrect information, just drop a comment down below letting me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.